For over 30 years, Berwyn's has been proudly supporting you.
At all the important stages in life.
And in business.
We know we're living in strange times, but we're in this together.
And right now, we want you to know
that wherever you are,
when you need us,
we're here for you.
You are joining with audiences from across the globe to enjoy Harrogate's International Festival's series of online events, streamed straight from our home to yours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy a presentation from Lewis Dartnell as part of Berwyn's Salon North, hosted by Helen Bagnall. We promise you've got the best seats in the house.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Berwyn's Salon North Unwind and Evolve. Not quite in the way that we expected, and I am so sorry that we're not together, and I really hope that lockdown has been okay for you. But I am so glad that due to the magic of the incredible Harrogate International Festivals, hello everyone there, and their hard work, supported by the wonderful people at Berwyn's, hello Berwyn's, we are riding the waves of this most unusual time to bring you Berwyn's Salon North in a digital space. And what a salon we have for you. We are going to be travelling the planet in time and in ideas, all from the comfort of our own homes, beginning with the astrobiologist Professor Lewis Dartnell with Origins, How the Earth Shaped Human History. We'll also be considering the huge ideas in the history and science of race from the geneticist and phenomenal science communicator Dr. Adam Rutherford in How to Argue with a Racist. And in between, we're going to get an up-to-the-minute insight into the psychological value of rest, and most importantly, how to get it, with Claudia Hammond in The Art of Rest, How to Find Respite in the Modern Age, and how lockdown has done crazy things for our ability to rest. And I should mention, all 3 books are available in our virtual foyer for you. All 3 deserve a good read, promise. So to kick us off, we couldn't be in better hands. Another Berwyn Salon North favourite. It's the astrobiologist Lewis Dartnell. Lewis is a professor at the University of Westminster here in London, and he's here with Origins, How the Earth Shaped Human History, already a Sunday Times best-selling book, and also the kind of talk we absolutely love at Berwyn Salon North. So please sit back and enjoy this incredible, atmospheric, fascinating salon.
Hi, my name's Lewis Dartnell. I'm a professor at the University of Westminster, and the field of my research is in a very new area of science called astrobiology, which is all about looking into the possibility of there being life beyond the Earth. Could there be ultra-hardy bacteria in the surface dust of our next-door neighbour planet, Mars? And if so, what are the best signs of that life to try to detect with our Mars rovers or probes? And alongside that academic research, I take a lot of time in science journalism and writing. And what I'm talking to you about today is the topic of my latest book, Origins, How the Earth Shaped Human History. And what I've tried to do with this new book is look and explore all the different ways that features of the planet we live on have had a profound influence on the whole of the human story, from our very origins as a species in East Africa, across the thousands and thousands of years of the history of civilization, with the rise and fall of different cultures and societies and empires, right up to the making of the modern world that we live in today. How have features of the planet itself, like plate tectonics, or where different resources can be found, or the churning circulation of the atmosphere, had a defining influence on our human story? And what I want to do for you today is pick out from the book just 3 particular areas to talk about. We'll start first right at the beginning of our story with the making of us, our origin in East Africa. This is the region on the planet where we evolved as a species. Not just Homo sapiens, but all of the other hominin, human-like species emerged here. And fundamentally, what needed to happen to transform hairy, tree-swinging, ape-like creatures into naked, hairless, bipedal, upright, walking and running human-like creatures is you need to transform the landscape of East Africa. You needed to turn rainforest into grassland. And this in itself is something of a curiosity. If we zoom out from this region of East Africa to look at the whole planet, and you allow your eyes to gaze across the midriff of planet Earth, across the equator, you'll recognise that this is where we find all of the great rainforests of the planet. The Amazon, the rainforests in Central Africa, and smothering the archipelago of islands in Southeast Asia. The equator is where it gets very warm, lots of water evaporates, it rises and cools, condenses and falls back as rain to support a wide band of rainforests all the way around the world along the equator. Except for a weird, dry little corner of East Africa where we were living. It should be rainforest and damp and wet, but it is dry and arid and grassy. And what can explain this change becomes much clearer if we peel off this satellite view and instead look at a terrain map of East Africa. All the maps in this talk, by the way, are images and cartography that I generated myself when I was researching and writing this book. I came from a biology background and I've become a massive map nerd while I've been working on this new book, Origins. And what's been happening in this part of the world where we were growing up is that there's been a huge plume of mantle rising up from deep in the interior of the planet and pushing up into the underside of the African continental plate. The very crust, the very skin of the planet has bulged upwards exactly like a giant zit. What you can see in the map here, shaded in red, are the Ethiopian highlands. This is where the Earth has been bulging upwards. And with that thinning and stretching of Earth's crust, the very skin of our planet ripped open in a characteristic Y-shaped pattern of cracks. It opened up the Red Sea at the top, as well as the Gulf of Aden, and then the third arm of that characteristic Y-shaped pattern of cracks is the Great African Rift Valley, running right down the side of the continent. And it is within that tectonic fracture in Earth's crust that we evolved as a species. The bulging up of the continent, and in particular the mountainous ridges flanking the Rift Valley, have formed a wall that has blocked the damp air from the ocean blowing over East Africa, or the damp air from the rainforest blowing over the region, and it is dried out. The previous landscape of the Jungle Book became that of the Lion King. Rainforest disappeared and became replaced by grassland and savanna, which was the fundamental driving force behind our evolution. But what's been puzzling paleontologists for years is, was it specifically about this tectonic crack in the crust of the Earth that drove our evolution to become such an exquisitely intelligent and versatile and adaptable species. Plenty of places around the world have dried out, and you evolve the camel. So what was special about here that drove our evolution to be so exquisitely intelligent? And the answer that's been emerging in recent years is that in East Africa, over the last 5 or 6 million years of our evolution, there has been a confluence of planetary factors. Not only the landscape of East Africa, and specifically the Rift Valley that funnels any rain that does fall in this dry area into a series of lakes running along the valley floor that I've highlighted in blue for you here. That geography and landscape is interacting with cosmic cycles in Earth's climate. The Milankovitch cycles, wobbles in Earth's orbit around the sun, or the tilt of our planet. And during certain periods of these cosmic cycles, we enter into particularly unstable climactic epochs. During those unstable climactic periods, the string of lakes along the Rift Valley floor have flickered in and out of existence like a loose light bulb. And every time those lakes have appeared and disappeared, they've fundamentally changed the amount of water that was available in the valley, the amount of vegetation that grew, the amount of wildlife that could survive there and that we could hunt and forage from. And so we evolved our large brains and our intelligence in order to outthink an unpredictable, chaotic environment. It was plate tectonics and cosmic cycles interacting with each other that gave birth to us as an intelligent species. Now, we didn't remain in this tectonic cradle of East Africa forever. We've migrated and dispersed out of our birthplace to now colonize the entire planet Earth. Humanity is the most widely distributed animal species on the planet. And it was the last great ice age, a period of particularly cold climatic conditions that lowered the sea levels so we could simply walk across dry seafloor to move between the continents, specifically to be able to walk from Eurasia right across to the Americas. And with the easing of the last ice age and the rising of the sea levels again, humanity, for the first time in its existence, experienced the interglacial period between ice ages when we weren't in East Africa. And our response to that was to invent agriculture, to domesticate wild animal and plant species, to settle down in increasingly dense populations, the villages becoming towns, become cities, and the birth of civilization itself. Now, I wanted to jump forward to a more recent chapter in our history, and incidentally a later chapter in the book, which looks at the global wind machine. How not movements of the earth beneath our feet and tectonics have influenced human history, but the invisible movements of the atmosphere high above our heads, specifically with the age of exploration and discovery, the age of sail from the European point of view. Now, this map here is slightly counterintuitive at first, because I'm not trying to show you the terrain on the land and the continents. I wanted to show you the landscape of the sea floor. So what we're seeing in blue here is the terrain on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, with the white mass on the right-hand side being the bulge of northwest Africa, with Europe to the north above that, the Iberian Peninsula sticking out into the Atlantic. And in the early 1400s, European navigators, Portuguese and Spanish explorers, first started venturing out into the vast expanse of this stormy, tumultuous ocean. And the stepping stones that drew these navigators out were the Atlantic archipelagos, places like the Canary Islands, the Cape Verde Islands. You can see in this map here that these archipelagos of islands are no more than the very peaks of huge underwater mountains. The Azores are the tops of volcanoes making up the mid-Atlantic ridge as this ocean continues to widen and expand. So the Portuguese explorers headed down the North African coast, following the direction that the winds and the ocean currents were already blowing. But to get back home again, these sailors faced a problem. You can't simply turn your ship around and head back the way you came, fighting against the very winds and ocean currents that brought you there in the first place. Instead, what they realised they had to do was completely counterintuitive at that time in history. They realised they had to turn their boats away from the safety of the shoreline, from the landmarks that they knew how to navigate by, and instead head out into the open expanse of the deep ocean until they encountered a different set of winds and ocean currents that would take them back home again. They completed what they called a volta do mar, a return of the ocean, a great loop through the sea, taking advantage of different wind systems. When the Portuguese explorers had headed further down the African coastline, the loop they needed to take to return themselves home was so wide through the ocean that they stumbled across the Azores, a set of islands that no human had visited before. Now, what these explorers were doing was getting their first inkling of a global pattern of wind systems and ocean currents that they blow. This North Atlantic was just the first piece of the jigsaw puzzle of the entire planet that we came to understand. Now, this view makes sense when we think again about how around the equator is where the warm air rises, as we saw earlier in this talk. That rising air cools and rolls over through high altitude until the atmosphere sinks back down to the Earth's surface at about 30 degrees north and south. The equator is where you find the rainforests. 30 degrees north or south with a dry descending air is where you find most of the deserts around the world. And then to complete this great vertical circuit, the atmosphere has to return to the equator along the Earth's surface. And that's just what we call the winds. The only other important detail is that while the atmosphere is completing these great vertical currents, the entire planet is turning beneath its atmosphere, which creates the Coriolis Effect. The winds are deflected to one side. So on either side of the equator, we find this wide band of winds that always blows towards the west. These are the trade winds. And then a band on the outside of that, where the atmosphere is churning in the opposite direction, creates a band of winds that always blow in the other direction. These are called the westerlies. So in order to complete trade links, networks across the oceans, to knit together the continents, all you need to do is understand that you move your ship north and south between these opposing bands of winds, using like conveyor belts to take you in different directions. And we came to exploit this understanding of the global pattern of the winds and the ocean currents in the very early stages of globalization, from the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, to create these vast trade routes around the world, joining the world up in a way that had never been done before in history. The Portuguese found their way around the southern tip of Africa, across the Indian Ocean, and to the source of the Spice Islands. They dominated that spice trade for a period and generated huge wealth for themselves on that trade. Now, it turns out that the only way to get around the bottom of Africa, following the way that the winds and ocean currents will take you, is to steer such a wide course through the South Atlantic that you stumble across South America. The reason that Brazil speaks Portuguese, whereas the rest of the continent speaks Spanish, is simply that is the way the winds were blowing the Portuguese explorers. The Spanish crossed the Atlantic, discovering North America, first with Columbus, of course, and then explored overland across this new continent to become the first European eyes to see the vast ocean on the far side of this new world, the peaceful ocean, the Pacific. And then the Spanish established the longest range trade route of the history of sail across the Pacific Ocean. They started in China, loading up their ships with porcelain and silk or other luxury commodities. They sailed north to the coastline of Japan, where they knew they could pick up the band of westerly winds that would take them the entire breadth of the Pacific Ocean till they made landfall on the American coastline. Here they headed down the shoreline till they got to Mexico and their colonies and silver mines in Mexico. They loaded up their ships with that silver coin and took it along the trade winds band back across to China, completing this enormous trade route. The reason that California was so geopolitically important for hundreds of years, the reason that cities like San Francisco and San Diego and San Jose were founded in the first place, is simply because that is the only place you can get to after sailing across the Pacific. That part of the coastline is where you need to build ports and towns to restock your ships before they can head down the coastline to Mexico to complete that trade circuit. The Dutch realised they could cut out the Portuguese on their spice route by taking a shortcut across the Indian Ocean, exploiting a particularly intense band of winds known as the Roaring Forties. This is literally like a motorway in the ocean. You can shave off thousands of miles of that crossing, but only if you know where to take your turn off from that motorway in the ocean, where to start turning north again back towards the islands of Southeast Asia. Because if you miss your turning, you plough into the coastline of Australia. And you wouldn't believe the number of shipwrecks along that coral reefs of the West Australian coastline from sea captains who've missed their turning on that Roaring Forties route, on that Brouwer route, that Dutch route across India. The reason that Cape Town was founded and South Africa became politically important was because that's where you need to build a port before your ships sail out into the open ocean on this long distance crossing of the Indian Ocean. Now, arguably the most important trade route for the subsequent playing out of history was the Atlantic Trade Triangle. This was established right in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when Britain and then the rest of Northern Europe had worked out how to get machines to make things for you, how to mass produce very, very cheaply, very, very quickly, products like textiles or weapons. And these manufactured goods, the products of the Industrial Revolution, were sailed down that old Portuguese route, down the coast of Africa, until they were sold to African chiefs and traded for human labour, slaves, who'd been abducted from their homes, bundled in chains into the holds of these ships, and then taken along that trade winds route to North America, where they were forced to work on the plantations around the colonies in North America, growing basic plant products like cotton or tea or coffee or sugar. And then these raw plant products, the outcome of that slave labour, was taken back across the Atlantic along the westerlies trade route to Britain and North Europe, where we then used our machines to turn those cotton fibres into textiles, which we then sailed back down to Africa, and so on and so on. This Atlantic trade triangle was almost like a great economic cog sat right across the North Atlantic, being blown round and round by the wind patterns of the planet and generating enormous profits on every leg of that triangle for its masters, for the slave traders. And all of these trade routes, the North Atlantic trade triangle, the Brouwer route, the Dutch route, the Spanish route across the Pacific, each of them have left their fingerprint in the development through history, and therefore the patterns we find in the world today, through that history of globalization and the making of the modern world. The churning of Earth's atmosphere has left its imprint in the way our world looks today. And we don't just see this fingerprint of the planetary in the global patterns from the age of sail. We can see the influence of the planetary in even modern politics, in how people choose to vote in elections. An example of this I've got to show you is in this region of the world, in North America, USA. And if I peel off the satellite view and instead show you the political map, how people chose to vote in the last presidential election, we see, perhaps unsurprisingly, that this region of the southern states is on the whole a Republican area. This is a sea of Republican red. But some counties in the southern states do vote Democrat. We can see a thin band of Democrat voting counties along the banks of the Mississippi River. But we can also see this very distinctive thin crescent of Democrat voting counties arcing its way across the southern states. And this doesn't correspond to anything you can see on the ground. If I peel off that political map and show you the terrain map, that crescent doesn't correspond to a river or a mountain range, and that pattern becomes clear only when we peel off the terrain map and instead look at the map of underlying geology. I'm showing you now rocks beneath your feet in those shades of grey arcing out from the course of the Mississippi River. These rocks beneath your feet are about 75 million years old. And if I overlay on that geological map, our political map again, you'll notice there is an astonishing correspondence between rocks beneath your feet that are 75 million years old and people choosing to vote for Democrats. This makes no sense at all. These people aren't geologists. They're not digging in their back garden or indeed their backyard and saying, I wanted to vote for Hillary, but now I've got to vote for Trump instead because the rocks in my back garden are too young or too old. But what is going on here is that there is a long chain of cause and effect, one thing leading to the next, stretching back through millions of years of our planet's history and hundreds of years of recent human history. And these rocks were laid down 70 million years ago in a period of Earth's history, a chapter known as the Cretaceous. And during the Cretaceous period, Earth's sea levels were much, much higher than they are today. The ocean lapped up right through the middle of North America in a great inland sea. And so the rocks laid down in that period of history were effectively thick deposits of seafloor mud, which became buried by more recent layers of rock and have been eroded and revealed again along that particular band of Cretaceous age rocks in the southern states. And it was realised in the early 1800s that when that ancient seafloor rock erodes again, it gives you a soil which is particularly fertile and productive for growing cash crops like cotton, things you can sell back to Europe for hard currency. And unfortunately, in this period of history, because cotton is such a pinicky crop to harvest, that meant slave labour. People were abducted from their homes in Africa, taken across that trade winds route across the Atlantic, as we saw earlier, and forced to work on those plantations along that Cretaceous band of 70 million year old rocks. And even today, after the Civil War, after emancipation from slavery, after the Civil Rights Movement, still today, after hundreds of years of history, the densest population of black African Americans still live along that Cretaceous band of rocks. People who unfortunately still today suffer from socioeconomic problems of poor opportunity, poor salaries, poor healthcare, poor education. People who are much more likely to vote for Democrat election promises than Republican ideals. And the city that I've marked for you on this map, the city of Montgomery, is the place where in 1955 a black woman called Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white gentleman on the bus. The very epicenter of the whole of the civil rights movement, which revolutionized society in the United States, began smack in the middle of that band of Cretaceous age rocks in the southern states. There is this profound link from the geology and the soil through agriculture and economics and sociology and modern culture through to the political map and how people choose to vote in elections. And just to demonstrate to you, I've not cherry-picked the only example around the world of where this link between the planetary and the political is evident. Here is an example from much closer to home on our own shores. On the left, I've shown you the constituencies that voted Labour in the last general election, and on the right-hand map, also shown in red, are rocks beneath your feet, which are about 320 million years old. And again, there is an astonishing correlation between the two. People voted left. They voted Labour if they happened to have rocks beneath their feet, which are about 300 million years old. Now, this particular link will be much more obvious to you when I tell you that the name of the chapter in Earth's history 300 million years ago was the Carboniferous. These areas of red on the map are the coal fields. This is where we've been able to mine underground and dig up fossilized forests, coal, which we realized we could throw into our furnaces in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and power ourselves through that transformative development in world history. And the latest step in that particular chain of cause and effect is that the Labour political party grew out of trade unions of the coal miners. So even here, there is this deep link between features of planet Earth and our modern lives through the various steps of geology and planetary features, through culture and sociology and economics. Now, these are just 3 stories that I've had time to tell you about from the book, from Origins, in this short talk. And there are plenty of other stories in the book that you can read about. Things like what catastrophe 500,000 years ago made Britain feel so independent of Europe. What caused us to become an island in this original Brexit event? Why do most of us eat a bowl of cereal or a slice of toast for breakfast? How does the planet determine even what we eat for breakfast? Or how did Holland's drowned landscape create the modern financial system? Why was capitalism born in the low-lying regions of the Netherlands? And you can find out the answers to these questions, what I call the clickbait of the book, with a copy of Origins, How the Earth Shaped Human History. If you're interested in any of my other writings, my previous book, The Knowledge, How to Rebuild Our World from Scratch, is a thought experiment on how you could reboot civilization after an apocalypse, how you could accelerate your progress back through history a second time around if only you had the most useful understanding and knowledge written down in a how-to guide for building civilization. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for being part of Berwyn's Salon North, Unwind and Evolve. I hope that you found new confidence in talking about race and science, having heard from Adam, have understood a bit deeper the relationship between the planet beneath our feet and the way we live, from Lewis, and fully understand that the world is in favour of the larks, like me, from Claudia, but that it is possible to have a much better relationship with rest. It's been superb to be able to do this Berwyn's Salon North together. Many thanks to Berwyn's, and from me and all at Harrogate International Festivals, thank you for being part of it. This salon is now closed.
Thanks for joining us. If you have enjoyed this event as part of the Harrogate International Festivals, please do think about a donation to ensure that our festivals can survive in the future. Donations can be made by texting HIF and the amount to 70085. For more events, please visit our online hub, the HIF Player. It's packed with upcoming live streams, events you've missed, archive recordings, and much more.
For over 30 years, Berwyn's has been proudly supporting you.
At all the important stages in life.
And in business. We know we're living in strange times, but we're in this together.
And right now, we want you to know
That wherever you are,
When you need us,
we're here for you.